stupid vacuum leak. Never believe anything anybody tells you, oh, that's done already.
Hey, welcome back to the Outride Garage. We're glad you guys came by to visit with us. And yes, more trouble. It just fights us every inch of the way. But you know what? That's all right, and we're going to whip this thing. I think we have carburetor problems on this, but today Tommy's going to be attacking that. You saw we did the cam brake in the other day. Everything went well, but it just didn't have the throttle response we were looking for. And we had some temperature variance on the headers as we were shooting it with our little thermo gun, and we didn't like what was going on. We think we have one side of the carburetor that may be leaning out on us. So we're going to try and address that. But we're glad you guys came by, spend a little time with us, and we're going to kick this girl in the rear end is what we're going to do. So hang on for the ride.
Good morning, everybody. Outride Garage here, and today we're doing some detective work. Boom, 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 boom. Anyway, so I'm on my way home, and I get home and I get a call from Pete. He said, "Man, this thing's not running right." This was after we had broken it in, and then we conversed later on, and he said that it wouldn't start at all. This is Brandon's truck. What? Mind you, all this stuff is new. Sometimes you can buy parts, especially for DIS distributors, and the number one colored cap you never want to use is brown. They're brittle, and for some reason, under a hard load and stuff like that, they break down. Now, I'll show you. Brandon's is black, which is good. So, I was like, because you can actually hear them break down, and sometimes you can actually use a spray bottle and spray around there, and it'll start arcing out, stuff like that, arcing through the cab, weird stuff, you know. Because it gets so hot here in Arizona that, you know, everything tries to break down in the middle of summer. So anyway, I'm like, well, it's kind of weird. So we put a timing light on it. Maybe the module died inside the distributor. Granted, all this stuff is brand new. No, it's got spark. It had 3 consistent pulses. Okay, won't start. Won't start. Mess with the timing, still won't start. Okay, take the cap back off. Look at the distributor, the rotor. Rotor looks fine. Looks brand new. I take the rotor off. I use my voltmeter, and I have no continuity between the pigtail that actually runs on the distributor cap versus where the coil hits it. What? Nothing. Take sandpaper to the cap. Works great. So, as you can see this, well, you can't see it this morning, but it's been running. But now, it's not missing or anything like that, but it sounds like it's kind of down on power. And we were kind of wondering about the jetting on the carburetor anyway. But anyway, Pete brought up an interesting point. He's like, hey, depending on how those runners are configured, do you think the carburetor might be leaning those runners out? Because over the course of time, we started seeing port values, temperature values, that were a little bit different. They weren't too far off. They were off by about 150 degrees, which, when these guys are running, that's questionable. Anyway, so as you can see, this runner's got a little bit of blue, right? They're brand new headers. These have a little bit more blue. Those are the 2 center runners. Over here, our outside runners are a little toastier than the inners. Now granted, the values weren't okay, so here's an instance, like if you had port values of say 300 or 400 degrees and you have a hole that's like running like 100 degrees, that's a straight up dead hole. It's not firing, right? But all these guys are firing, everything like that. But I started looking this morning. I took the carburetor off and found more issues with the carburetor, new carburetor. Anyway, let me show you something here. So this is considered like a dual plane intake manifold. Here's your right side, left side. Left side feeds this port. Well, it feeds number 1, feeds number 7, and also feeds number 2 and 4 and 6. This runner. this guy feeds the other ones, right? Well, when I took the carburetor off, very gingerly, because I wanted to make sure about my float levels. I didn't want to be running out of fuel in the bowls, right? I don't like the float level. I don't think it's the floats. I think we have a marginal fuel pump, marginal new fuel pump. So we're looking at the top of Brandon's truck. This is your passenger side, driver's side. Driver's side had more fuel in it than the passenger side. But if you remember, the driver's side port on the intake feeds these guys. She was hitting on all 8 and everything else. So it's an indicator that it's not going super lean, but she's running a little dry. So anyway, so I've had the carburetor apart already. I cleaned it out already. I mean, you guys have seen me do that before, and I'm sure you guys have done it. The Edelbrock's a really super easy carburetor to mess with. But I did want to show you something here. A big pet peeve of mine. Look at those floats. The float level this way looks good. So that'd be closing your fuel source off. That's opening your fuel source. But you see how far down they hang? That's no good. You know why? Because the bottom of the float hits the bottom of the bowl, and if it sits for any amount of time, the fuel is like an oil product, right? So as it dries out and stuff like that, it turns tacky, like roofing tar. It glues the floats down. When you go to start it, the float can now not come up to turn the fuel off. So now you have a flooding issue. But it doesn't just flood, it shoots fuel through the top of the carburetor and you have a fire. So if you have an Edelbrock at home, even if it's brand new, check that. I'll almost guarantee that the stops for the floats are not adjusted. How I adjust them is just take a screwdriver and go to your highest point, like right in here, and kind of get an eyeball, something like that. So there's my whole depth, right? And then measure, adjust your floats to that. And a float stop is a guy on the back, not on the front. On the front, all that is to control the how much fuel goes in, but that is your stop. Make sure you adjust them, especially if the car sits at all. I would venture to say if it sat for more than 3 weeks, you could potentially have a problem. Check it. So now that I've got my pet peeves out of the way, we're going to go ahead and reassemble Brandon's carburetor on here. We're going to go ahead and put it back on that motor, hook it all up, and fire it up, and hopefully they'll kind of solve some of our problems. I mean, the motor still needs to be dialed in, timed, all that other stuff, but just as we progressed, it was starting to do some more weird stuff. So I mean, if anything was straight up wrong, we would have found out within 30 seconds of the motor running. So I'm not concerned about any of that. This is just stupid runnability stuff. This pump is working, right? I mean, even this morning it filled the carburetor up and stuff like that. I'm just wondering if we're lacking on a volume issue. If we're lacking on a volume issue with the cammed out big block, you know it's going to come up short. So enough blabbing. Put the carburetor back together. Let's put it on there, see what we got. Hang on. I don't know if you guys have been following along. So we broke in his motor and all that, and I tinkered with some stuff. I was like, maybe the carburetor's dirty or something like that. And granted, it's a brand new carburetor, but it's still kind of doing the same thing. We didn't really do much for it. And I went ahead and checked the pressure, the fuel pressure values on it. Now granted, this was a new pump, but I think it's coming way short. I was like, you know what, let's not even put a gauge on it, let's just see what it does in its natural state. And after running for a minute, you know, one bowl had like maybe 1/8 of an inch worth of fuel in it, and the other side was almost topped off. So I think we have a couple things going on. I think we have a defective new carburetor. That's my theory. And I'll show you what I'm going to do very reluctantly to a brand new carburetor. And we're going to go ahead and change the fuel pump too. It'd be kind of nice if you could do one at a time, that we could really truly find out what it was. But at this point, we don't care. We just want it to run. We want to hear that thumpy can, man. So I don't know if you've ever done this before. It's not really nerve-wracking, but it's a way you can true stuff at your house. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do here. This is the bottom of Brandon's carburetor. Now I've already started, but make sure your butterflies are closed. You know, just hold them closed or whatever. That way you're not sanding on that. But what you want to do is take a file. Don't ever just sit there and do this. Don't do that. Or just don't do this, you know. What you want to do is an X pattern, crisscross, applesauce, da-da-da-da-da. Don't get aggressive with it, because after messing with it for just a couple minutes, files are usually pretty flat. You can kind of test your theory with, you know, run along this way and see what's scratched up, and then flip it upside down and then see what it scratched then. They'll kind of give you an idea as to how flat that file is. But you know, if it's flat on both sides and you continually do that and flip the file, stuff like that, you can actually get stuff pretty flat without like putting it on a mill. What I think is going on is, I'll show you what's going on here so far. What I found is it's starting to sand right in here, a little bit right in here, but right here at the ears where they've been mounted, but it's not sanding it at all in the middle. That would indicate that actually the base of the carburetor is actually warped. Because like I said, we're running lean on the driver bank, but this also feeds the ports that are running higher temperatures. So, you know, I went back and forth. I was like, you know, maybe I adjusted the valves wrong or something like that. I don't think it's that, because the commonality is you have 4 cylinders that are being fed by one side of the plenum, or the intake. I think it's a carburetor issue, and if it's starving for fuel level, then that's another problem. So I'm gonna stay here and I'm gonna kind of file. I'm not gonna spend a bunch of time on it. I just want to see what it looks like. Unfortunately, you guys buy these brand new carburetors and nobody knows any different. You know, I've ran into it, the same thing with me. You know, quality control is questionable anymore, and you would think it's a brand new carburetor, should be spot on. Well, they're not. And I found a lot of things with Eldorrock where the venturis were not flat, stuff like that. Anyway, so let's go ahead and see if we can plane this down a little bit. And what you want to see is, you want to see it starting to make contact here with your file in this range here. Now it's already making contact in here, but that doesn't count, because the center of the intake, the gasket's up here, so the center of the intake actually sits lower. So I can't go by the center of the carburetor. We got to go by the perimeters, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and, you can already tell, man, it didn't even touch in the center, but it's been touching out here. So let's go ahead and, I just want to play with it just for a little bit, and then put it back together. I guess we have a really nice fuel pump coming. I guess Brandon went ahead and bought a really good fuel pump for this thing. So that's coming on later on today. I'm going to try to get ahead of them a little bit and just kind of mess with this carburetor a little bit. And maybe we'll find out that the carburetor is really warped. Who knows? Anyway, so hang on. Watch me sand. Okay guys, let's make a mess. Again, make sure your butterflies are closed, that way you're not sanding on them. You don't need to apply much pressure. You'll find out in a couple minutes of how bad it actually is. Okay, so mind you, I had been sanding on this thing prior to starting up the camera. So do you see, you can actually start seeing the sheen, right? This is all, looks like it's been filed. But see how it's real shiny right here? And look at over here. That whole port is just barely now touching right there, right? There's that. This whole section here. Now I'm not too concerned about out here, but Now again, we're just with the file, right? Now you're starting to see how flat that carburetor really actually was. If I knew we were going to have this kind of trouble, I would have taken, when his intake goes off, I would have did the same. You can do the same thing. You can do the same thing on any super flat surface with the file, as long as the file is relatively flat. And that's why, as long as you don't stay in one area, you won't cut a groove. Anyway, if I knew we were going to have this kind of trouble, I would have had and I would have tried to plane his intake also. This might not fix it, I don't know, but it's one thing. It's just one less thing that might be a potential problem. And I'd really hate Brandon to have to buy another carburetor, you know. But if there's something wrong internally, you know, like maybe when there's some sand in there from the casting or something like that, who knows, right? The only way you'd never know is if you put it on a flow bench. Well, I don't have one of those. Let's continue sanding this a little bit more till I want to see this. I want to see this sanded type of surface right in here. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Let's go ahead and spray it off. Let's go ahead and put another gasket on there. Let's go ahead and put the carburetor back on there. Actually, I'm just going to reassemble it. I already had it apart this morning. Put that back on there and then shift gears to something else, because we can't do much more until we have another fuel pump. So hang on. So we're on Brandon's truck again, and here's the intake. This is the EGR. This is where your EGR would normally go, and what we have here is a block off plate. It doesn't look like they had fabbed it up, but it does look like looks like factory something. Anyway, let me show you something here. You see that pinhole right there? Well, half of that is covered with the gasket. But anyway, that is a vacuum leak. Again, it might not completely cure it, but that is a vacuum leak. So we have some gaskets left over from building the motor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and see if I have an EGR gasket, and see if it fits a little bit better. If not, we're going to have to either epoxy that, which I guess we could do, or make another block off plate. I really don't want to go through that kind of trouble. But anyway, and that's EGR port, and that is right in, that's a vacuum leak right into the intake on the lower runners. So anyway, let's just go ahead and try to button that up, and then we'll put it back on, and then we'll put the carburetor back on.
Alright, we got Brandon here. It's another Friday. He's going to listen to it. We got it all cleaned up and running crisp. We're going to show you guys. Hopefully it turns out good as far as the volume is concerned and the sound, because this girl snaps now. So check this out.
Are you running the throttle? Or?
I'll run the throttle.
She should be.
Hopefully we don't run her out of gas. We haven't put any more in recently.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds different, doesn't it?
That's a whole nother motor.
Whole nother motor. And all it took was a solid week of tweaking on it. Adjust and tweak and bend and hit and kick and a little bit of swearing. You know, you do what you got to do.
I'll tell you.
Whole different beast, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a whole different beast. All right, this is the first time ever that Brandon's going to actually reach in and start his car. All right, so this is one of those weeks where it almost looks like we got nothing done, but so much work goes into making the car run right. But this girl, as you heard in the video already, is running crisp, and there's just not a better word for it that I can think of. We want to remind you guys to subscribe to the channel, share the link, you know, send it to someone, let them see some of the silly things we're doing. Give us a thumbs up, give us a like, and hit that bell notification. We appreciate you guys coming by and spending time with us, and as usual, thanks for watching.